What's up, guys? I just decided to talk about the salt that I like to use for my reef tank and giving people a general better idea of what salt to choose for their reef tank. Now, for a tank, usually there's flower or reef tanks. For flower tanks, honestly, just go with the cheapest salt because it really doesn't matter what salt you use if you're not going to add corals. But if you have corals, then choosing the salt is more important. Now, if you have only soft corals, you could use the same salt that you use for a flower tank, which means generally go for the cheapest salt if you're going for soft corals. When you're talking with large polyp stonies and stony corals, you're gonna need to think about your salt choices a little more. Now, I have a nano reef, and the salt I use is Instant Ocean Reef Crystals. Now, the reason why I chose this salt is because it was the cheapest reef salt available and it was convenient for me to find. I have a PetSmart near me, they sell reef crystals, and my local fish store also sells reef crystals, and it's the cheapest. Now, the other important thing about reef crystals is it has elevated calcium levels and magnesium levels, which is pretty important for a nano reef, especially if you're not dosing. Because I don't dose my tank, I rely on water changes to keep my parameters. Now, sometimes I do dose a little bit of baking soda just to keep alkalinity from fluctuating too much, because alkalinity drops much faster than calcium, and my water changes usually handle calcium but not the alkalinity, so sometimes I add baking soda. But and baking soda is really easy to find and cheap. For calcium, dosing is a little harder and a little more expensive. Either way, I use reef crystals because I want a salt with elevated calcium and magnesium levels. Now, if you're choosing a salt for nano reef, and you don't plan on dosing, what you want to do is look for a salt with elevated calcium and magnesium levels, because you'll be relying on these in order to keep your parameters. If you're dosing your tank, now you want a salt that is closer to the parameters that you like to keep stable in case you need to do a large water change. Now, something that people may not consider while choosing a salt is actually what your local fish store uses. If you use the same brand as your local fish store, you don't have to worry about acclimating the corals or the fish to your tank as much. All you really need to do is temperature acclimate them, which is a significant advantage. And my local fish store uses reef crystals. So all I do is temperature acclimate my corals and drop them in. And most corals, from what I've bought, were perfectly fine with this. I never had to drip them or anything. So that's another advantage of choosing a salt that your local fish store uses, because you won't have to worry about corals dying or getting sick from acclimation, or even your fish for that matter. It's much easier process on the fish, so it's a good idea to choose the salt that your local fish store uses. Now, I also like to point out is that when you're dosing your tank, problem with choosing a salt with elevated levels is if you're dosing your tank, you're keeping at a certain level, you have to do a large water change, you're going to throw your levels out of whack. Which is why you want to choose the salt that is closest when you're dosing your tank. But when you're not dosing your tank, you want a salt with elevated levels so you could maintain at least a reasonable level of calcium and alkalinity even while they're dropping in your reef tank from your weekly water changes. Now, beyond these 2 points, or 3 points, which is choosing your local fish store salt for acclimation purposes, choosing a salt based on whether you're dosing or not dosing, and price, that's all there really is to choosing a salt. And actually, there's one more point I like to point out about choosing your salt. Now, Reef crystals here has a really bad habit of absorbing water from the air. So you have to make sure you keep it sealed as long as possible. Like, it's so bad with Reef crystals that if you spread a little bit on a piece of paper on your table, the salt will dissolve from the moisture in the air. And my house has AC, so it's not humid in my house at all, but it will dissolve from the moisture in the air. So you really, when it comes to Reef crystals, you want to keep it sealed. Now, I also like to point out that Reef crystals dissolves easily. So maybe those two properties correlate, like dissolving quickly means it also absorbs moisture quickly, which is also something you might want to consider. So I won't consider it that important of a property rather than your parameters and price, or even like your local fish store uses. But it is something to note, especially if you decide to use the same type of salt that I use. Now, if there's any other things that you know that for choosing a salt is important, let me know in the comments down below, because it'd be useful for other people watching this video as well.